Sara, welcome to the Deconstruction Zone channel. For those who are unfamiliar with Sara's work, she could be found on the TikToks. And do you have a handle on TikTok that you go by, or should I just display your handle on the screen when we do this interview? Or
That's
sorry,
fine. Yeah. You can just display it on the screen. It's leaving
perfect.
faith.
Okay, leaving faith, very good. Mine is so long, I always just put it on the screen. And it's a great community for those that are deconstructing. I personally found that seems to be where you can have open, honest conversations. I mean, you'll still get attacked by people that are, offended by what you're doing, but
Yeah, I've been really pleasantly surprised by how quickly I've been able to just participate in the community. There's a lot of people there,
yeah,
a lot of support. It's really cool.
right. There really is. And I have found through a couple live sessions that there are some Christians that are still in the faith that are in the process of deconstructing that do want an honest dialogue with people that have already kind of deconstructed and left the faith. And
Mhm.
so I think that's good too, that I guess there's a spectrum of people. It's not just people bickering and fighting over being mad that you left.
Yeah, I agree. I've found the commenters that I get as well are on a spectrum. Some people have some earnest questions, and some people are just looking for support and community.
Right, right. Well, I'm certainly glad we were able to connect on a TikTok, and we're going to talk a little bit today about your process. And one of the first questions that I was curious about was, what was your upbringing in terms of religious background? Because I feel like sometimes this does play a major factor in people's deconversion journey.
Yeah, so I was raised by religious parents, but we weren't really in an extreme kind of situation. My
Hmm.
parents were Presbyterian. That was the type of church we went to. And they played in the worship team. And
Okay.
so that meant that I got to church at like 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and we stayed until after 12. So church was a big part of my Sunday.
Hmm.
Um, but it was also a big part of my social life, and so my friends were at church, and then I got involved in youth group and all of those things. I think, my parents were, um, it was important to them, it mattered a lot to them, but I think a lot of the religious instruction that I got
Hmm.
was from like Sunday school and youth group pastors. And
Right.
sorry, my dog's barking. Um,
The dog wants to join. It's okay.
she does. Um, and I think I ended up in a more fundamentalist place than my
Okay.
parents did.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, they care about God, they care
Hmm.
about, religion being a part of their lives. But for me, it never made sense to me that the church was full of people whose lives looked exactly like everybody else's.
Right.
I was like, wait, if you just told me that the only thing that matters is us
Mhm.
going to heaven, and we got to get everyone to go to heaven.
Right.
So what are you all doing? Like, what why are you worried about this stressful fancy job and all of these worldly things? Like, none of that's supposed to matter. Like, you just told me what was the only important thing. And it was always a frustration to me that if you're saying you have a
Mhm.
relationship with the God of the universe, your life should look totally different than someone
Right.
who doesn't.
Hmm.
And so I think, I think I just took it really seriously. Like I really took it to heart, and um, it made me kind of a weird kid. Like
Yeah.
I remember, I went to public school for the first few years of elementary school, and I would have like Bible studies on the
Hmm.
playground, and like the little kids would come to me and ask me questions about God. And I'm sure I gave them terribly wrong answers,
Oh
but
yeah. Yep.
So I hope none of those kids remember anything I said. I don't.
There's some kid out there today holding on to one thing you said.
Oh no.
I'll just make it through the day. I know this one thing.
I'm very sorry to whoever that is.
I think that's common, especially as a young Christian. You think that you've discovered some answers, and it takes a while to realize you didn't maybe always discover the answers you thought you did.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it. Because I'm a funny blend of like I like emotion and connection and relationship, but also, I'm a scientist by trade. And so I like facts and evidence. And so I think my kind of journey into deeper and deeper into it, into religion, actually was looking for those facts and
Right.
evidence and confirmation. And so it took me to a deeper, more intense place because I wanted to get it right. Like if this is what's supposed to only be the important thing in life, I want to get it right. I really want
Right.
to understand. And that actually ended up taking me to a kind of charismatic Pentecostal place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, because weirdly to me, that felt like evidence.
Right.
It felt like these people actually do live differently than
Right.
everyone else. There's this demonstration of the supernatural in their lives. Like, isn't that what it's supposed to be about? And I think that I was really drawn to that.
Yeah, if there's going to be some kind of evidence, it needs to manifest itself in a way that's visible, right? And
Mhm.
people would hold on to, say, like speaking in tongues and healings and prophecy and say, yes, we have evidence, and these are the evidences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I found that very reassuring for a time,
Yeah.
because it was some type of confirmation.
Yeah. And I'm curious, now that you bring it up, your journey separating a little bit from your parents' journey in moving more to a fundamentalist viewpoint. Did they find this strange? Did they think that this was normal behavior, or were they okay with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I became more intense in college. I went on sort of a mission trip, to South Africa
Mhm.
with, this guy named Bruce Wilkinson, who is, that's a whole other,
Yeah.
story we could get into. But um, on that trip is where I really started to experience charismatic things for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I came back from that kind of like wanting to be different. And at first, I think my parents were super on board because it looked like a traditional mission trip in
Right.
that I got some money from my church. And so they helped supported me. My parents threw like a little barbecue when I got back, and everyone sat around and listened to my stories and like, yeah, this is normal. And then I went back again, this time to Zambia with just one of my friends. And so we took another trip to go back. And I think after that, I started to, um, make them a little uncomfortable. So I got very involved in this small, close knit group at college my senior year, who were very like, we would stay up all night praying, and they would all have
Hmm.
prophecies and into that. And then when I went off to grad school, it was very lonely because I didn't have that connection.
Yeah.
And so I looked more online, and that's when I, kind of started following IHOP, the
Yep.
International House of Prayer. Yep.
Hmm.
And man, is that a wild ride.
Sure is.
But from that, like I started fasting twice a week, and
Mhm.
I set aside like an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening to pray and read my Bible. And so it just totally took over my life. And I think that's when my parents were like, this is kind of a lot. And I remember feeling frustrated with them
Mhm.
because I was thinking, isn't this what you wanted for me? Like,
Right.
you wanted this to be the most important thing. And look, it is. And I'm sure they were thinking like, yeah, but fasting and really like, this is too extreme.
But according to the New Testament, and that is the goal. The goal is to become so dead to yourself that it's only Jesus left over.
Mhm.
And so the whole dying to self, a lot of people don't take seriously, but I feel like that's one of the reasons why when people do deconstruct, and if they do leave the faith, they become sort of militant or resentful against the faith because they gave so much to
Yeah.
it. And I think that's what a lot of Christians don't understand, that they look at ex-Christians and they think, oh, well, you were never saved in the first place, or you were never serious. When in fact, the atheists that you're meeting were the most serious Christians you've ever met. They spent many, many days fasting and praying and holding Bible studies and going to Bible college and, completing higher education and, trying to lead others. And so when we speak out, it's not because there was anything, it's not because we were insincere, it's because, oh, we've been duped.
Yeah, exactly. Like you want to, um, for lack of a better word, save people from having to go through that pain that you went through.
Right.
Um, yeah, exactly. Like definitely people on my TikTok have said that, like, oh, you were never saved. You weren't a real Christian. If you really knew God, like you would never leave.
Right. You went
Like,
to the wrong church.
yes.
You read
No,
the wrong book of the Bible.
not it. Like I promise, I was so dedicated and it was my
Right.
whole life. And yeah, and now I think the thing that bothers me the most about the way that my faith worked was that it taught you to hate yourself.
Right.
And like deep down, you are bad and wrong and evil, and all of your desires and intuitions are all sinful, and you have to get rid of all of those. And
Right.
I think that's so painful and damaging. And I mean, I think that's why I started to speak out against it. It's not that I want people to have to, I don't want to convince anyone of anything,
Mm.
believe what you want to believe, but I don't want you to have to hate yourself because of
Right.
what you believe.
Right. And I got some really good advice a while ago before I left for seminary. I was living in Indiana, and a good friend of mine who also at one point became my boss asked me, and he's like, do you know why you're a Christian? And I explained to him, and then when I was completely done, he goes, that's all, I just wanted to make sure you knew why. He goes, because if you're going off to seminary and you're not fully aware of what you're getting into, you might have a hard time. But I got the slight impression that maybe he might have grew up in the faith but is no longer,
Mm-hmm.
and just wanted to make sure I knew what I was getting myself into. But again, he was a little bit like you. He wasn't trying to push me out of the faith. He wasn't trying to convince me to not believe. And ultimately, that might be a foolhardy position to hold, anyways, trying to convince people that they shouldn't believe,
Yeah.
um, because for the most part, they're not ready to hear that. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. When I was deconstructing, I found this video on YouTube. There wasn't a lot at the time. TikTok had not been invented
right?
yet. And but I found this explanation for belief that really made a lot of sense to me. And I did a short video on it, but picturing belief as like a stool with a bunch of legs on it.
Mhm.
And these are different things that hold up your belief. And so, your belief in anything, part of that is facts and logic and information. Part of it is your life
Mhm.
experience. Part of it is your community and reinforcement. Part of it is your own psychology and emotions. And so, changing a belief requires you to kind of kick the legs out of each of
Mhm.
those. And so, on either side, Christians trying to convince atheists or atheists trying to convince Christians, just facts are never going to do it. Like
No,
it's not going to change someone's
right,
belief because it's held up by all these other things.
right. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about those legs here in a moment. I had a question before we get there, though. During your experience, did you ever have, we'll say, a born again moment where where you felt like you did something special and something changed, or was it more of a progressive move from position A to position B?
Um, I grew up in the church and just kind
Mhm.
of always thought that I was a Christian. I had times in like junior high and high school where it was less important to me. But I will say that after going to South Africa, when I came back, I was definitely very different. I was
Yeah.
kind of recommitted in a
Mhm.
really tangible way. So I would say that experience was a big turning point for me.
Okay. And then one of the other questions, because again, I think this comes up in a lot of people's journeys, is whether or not there was any type of, we'll say, a fear of hell that played into your faith journey. Because I know for a lot of people, they might have gone to like the heaven's gates, hell's flames,
I
you know.
saw it playing. Oh, so
Yeah,
sad.
and that, if especially if you're a young person, that's kind of traumatizing, and you think, I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to burn forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did,
Yep.
did that play a role in your journey at all?
Um, so yeah, I saw that play. I was 9 years old. Um,
That's so young.
so young. Oh
Uh,
my gosh. And what's really funny is I saw it with my mom, and my mom did not like it. And
oh.
the reason she didn't like it is the most traumatizing scene is when the family dies in the car crash and just the little girl is going and her family's being ripped by demons down to hell.
Mhm,
And Jesus is standing on the steps and he's crying, reaching out to the family that he can't save.
mhm.
My mom didn't like that because she thought that made it look like Jesus wasn't very powerful. Uh,
Yeah, I'd say so.
which fair
I think
criticism.
she's right. Oh no.
So it wasn't the trauma of, being ripped apart. She was like, that doesn't seem right. I think Jesus is more powerful than that.
Right.
Fair enough, mom.
You know what? That's a great observation that she had though. Like my mom has similar observations. She's kind of a deconstructed Catholic. She grew up Catholic, and she'll say that she's no longer Catholic, but a lot of her beliefs are still Catholic like. But she does the same thing. She'll see some things, and I think she's able to rationalize it in her head. Well, if God is real, or if Jesus exists, then logically, by extension, X, Y, and Z must be true, regardless of what the Bible says. And
Mm,
I,
mm.
I think that just goes to the point that a lot of times humans are able to rationalize certain things, and they assume that makes the most sense, and then they have to have the Bible to tell them that no, don't trust your brain, don't trust the thing that is common sense, only trust this one thing. you know
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, so Heaven Gates Hell's Flame, that was something. That was where I had my we're gonna call it born again experience, was
Mm,
at that play. Me and my best friend Kyle, his mom was the one that brought both of us.
wow.
So
Yeah, I didn't, that was definitely scary. I saw a lot of, I went to a Christian school from third to fifth grade, which is also where I learned some more, I don't know, scarier beliefs. We had to,
mm,
the rapture was a big thing.
yeah.
And we watched, oh my gosh, these movies. It was called A Thief in the Night. And
Hmm.
this is like a 1970s rapture movie that like it's like Left Behind before Left
Right.
Behind. And it was so traumatizing. Like, I don't know why you would show this to kids. It's made with adults, and the rapture happens, and then these people are left
Yeah.
behind, and they have to not get like 666 tattooed on their hands, and they people who refuse to do it die by guillotine. And like
Oh no.
showed that was fourth grade, and they showed like, yep, you're going to die by guillotine if you
Oh
refuse to
wow.
get the 666 tattooed on your hand. Like, why would you show that to fourth graders, particularly because they said this is true, like this is going to happen.
Right.
So you have to be saved because you do not want to get left behind, or you are going to get your head chopped off via guillotine.
And you know what? My dad was a late convert to Christianity. He converted in his mid 40s,
Okay.
and he fell into like independent fundamentalist Southern Baptists where they
Mm.
would show those types of movies to kids. And I remember it became a problem for my parents because my mom didn't convert. But my dad was like, we have to save the kids. We have to make sure they don't go to hell and the whole thing. And at this point, I can only imagine what my poor mother was thinking, like, wait, what are you talking about?
Oh no.
And my dad was, as people in the 90s, many had discussed, well, barcodes are the new mark of the beast, and
Uh-huh.
then microchips. uh, Anyways, we could talk on that tangent for quite a while. I want to talk a little bit about were there any when did you get like the first cracks in your wall? When did you start to see maybe some gaps in the theological viewpoints, or maybe even in some of the Bible stories that made you think, that's weird, I don't know about that?
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I actually looked back through a lot of my, I used to keep like a prayer journal.
Mhm.
And so I read back through that, and definitely is an example of like those different legs of holding up the belief, because
Mhm.
I had some prayers where I was asking God, like, this doesn't make any sense, God. Like, I read this. This doesn't seem like you. This doesn't seem like your character. Why is this in the Bible? I don't get it.
Right.
And then I would finish the prayer with, but I know you're good and I know you have a plan and I just don't understand. So help me understand.
Right.
Yeah, so I definitely read some stories that didn't make sense to me. The misogyny didn't make sense to me.
Right.
Like I so I part like I'm a professor, so my job is to
Mhm.
stand in front of people and teach. And I love that. I know a lot of people are afraid of public speaking, but like teaching people and speaking in front of an audience is something that I love to do.
Mhm.
And when I was really into the faith, I love to study. And so the idea of like leading a church totally made sense to me. Like, it felt like I was designed to do that.
Mhm.
And it was infuriating that like I wasn't allowed to. Like, being a woman, I'm not allowed to do that. Like,
Yeah.
why would God design me this way and give me these specific
Mhm.
gifts and then say, "Oh, but you're a woman, so you can't do that."
Right.
It make any sense at all to me.
And it's clear when you read the Old Testament that it was written from the viewpoint of men who wanted to keep the status quo of women at being second class, basically.
Mhm.
Not as low as the cattle, but not much higher. I mean, they were bought and sold into marriage as possessions.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, and even the New Testament, it's like maybe there's respected a little bit more, but
mhm,
not so much,
right.
still definitely put down as second class citizens.
And it's frustrating in today's society because women have, like yourself, you have PhD. Women have extensive training and knowledge in areas that would put men to shame, but yet there's a 2,000-year-old book that says, despite all these things, sorry, no dice.
Yeah, and I'll try not to go too far on a tangent, but I do think that it harms everybody, right?
Right.
Like the idea of, men are this and women are that. I think it's both harmful to women and to men. And I
It
think
is.
everybody loses out with that.
Right. And you know what? They For a while it was bad enough, and it still is some places where even in the world of education, like I had a New Testament, I'm not going to call her a New Testament professor. She was more like a professor of theology. And when she went to school, I mean, this would have been back in the 50s, and she said they tried to get her to drop out every step of the way. every step of the way because women weren't supposed to teach. And she said in Greek, her first Greek class, the very first day, the Greek professor walked up to her and said, women shouldn't be taking Greek. And she's like, well, they speak it, so I'm not really sure what the problem is. So, but it's pervasive in Christian culture, trying to make sure that women are not able to be elevated to the same status of men. And it's infuriating as someone who's got 4 sisters who love them dearly, that wouldn't want them to be treated the way that women are treated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just really unfortunate, and the world misses out on a lot by
Right.
doing that.
One of the questions, I'm sure, other than the status of women, you probably started to once you develop one question that makes you suspicious. Sometimes it's easier to look at other things and like, well, since we're here questioning things, what about what about this, right? Did you have somebody in your life that you can talk to these people and maybe find answers or at least discuss it openly?
No, I had to do the whole thing all by myself.
Mm,
That was really hard and really lonely.
yeah.
So what happened for me was my belief in what got you to heaven was that you had to have this being saved moment. You had to have a moment where
Yep.
you acknowledged who Jesus was and what he did, and whatever phrase you want to use, accept that and turn your life over to him. And so what started the cascade for me was my grandfather dying. And I wasn't mad at God that he died. He was 90, he had cancer, it was his time. But
Mhm.
he was such a good, kind person, who always showed up for people and was amazing. And he did not meet that standard I had in my head of, being saved.
Right.
And so I never had to really wrestle with the idea of hell because I had this belief that sure, there's a hell, but like God's going to come through for people. Like
Right.
there's going to be a moment because God wants to save people. So God is going to save people before they die.
Mhm.
Like I had that belief. And so when my grandpa died and God didn't show up for him, like he was, my grandpa was a good person. He did all
Mhm.
these things, and it wasn't like he was this evil guy living his sinful life. Like he was a really good guy. And so when he died, that was the first time I had to think about, like, wait a minute, like God didn't show up for this person. And now what I believe is that person has to go to hell.
Right.
And it absolutely shook me because I knew that that wasn't justice. Like I knew that
Right.
wasn't good. And so it's like, wait, God can't send him to hell. Like that's not
Right.
okay. This is terrible. And so that led me to trying to question, wait, what do I believe about hell? And did I get this right? And, um, I had such a rigid vision of the Bible that it was perfect and
Mhm.
infallible. And so once I allowed myself that kind of crack in belief of like,
Mhm.
wait, do I believe in hell? And what if the Bible's wrong? If
Right.
the Bible is wrong about this one thing, I have no mechanism for deciding what things could be correct and what things could be
Mhm.
incorrect. And so if one little part of it is wrong, the whole thing falls down.
Right. Because is the Bible not supposed to be the standard that everything is measured by, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the Bible is wrong, I have nothing
Right.
because like, this is how I get all of my information. This is how God is supposed to talk to me. And I don't know what to do if it's not correct.
Right. Right. So I think your experience is similar to what most people experience. I know it was similar to me and a number of my friends who are no longer among the faithful. Um, in that if you come from a background where you believe that the Bible is inerrant, or at least that you believe the original manuscripts are inerrant, when you do find the glaring issues, you're like, oh, this is a problem because I base my whole life on this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so fragile,
Right.
and I in some ways envied friends of mine who had a much looser relationship with it, that
Right.
like, hey, these are stories about people who
Hmm.
believed in God, and I don't think it's all true, but I get some good things from it. Like that's a much healthier relationship to have with that document.
Of your journey as you're starting to question things and you're starting to move away from the faith, or at least you're starting to deconstruct the things that you believe. Um, did anyone notice? Like, were there people that were like, "Hey, something's different. She's going through something," and were those people helpful or hurtful?
So at the time, I'm in the middle of doing my PhD. My friend circle is very small,
Mm,
and is um, I don't have very many people that I'm close to and talking to, but I have church. So I had this church that I was going to, and didn't feel like I could really confide in people there. I was teaching Sunday school at the time, and I was fifth grade girls, and oh, they were great. I loved those girls. And as I'm deconstructing, I remember the last lesson that I taught in Sunday school was, how do we know the Bible is true?
right.
And
That's a
I,
tough one.
oh my God. And they're giving me this curriculum, and the curriculum does not answer the question
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
anyone's satisfaction.
Yeah.
And like kids are smart,
Right.
kids know when, you are BSing them,
Yes.
and they ask great questions. And so after that, I was like, I don't want to BS these kids. Like I can't do this anymore. Like I
Right.
don't and I was also so I was singing on worship team at the time, and there was the guy who played bass was older. He was like in his 40s or 50s. I'm in my 20s at the time, and
Mm,
so he and his wife kind of were, mentor parental
mm.
role in my life. And one day after band practice, he just takes me aside. He's like, hey, how's it going? And I was like, it's fine. And he's like, how's your relationship with God going? And I just burst into tears. And he's like, oh my God,
Did not see that coming.
not. One of my unfortunate skills is like hiding when things are going
Hmm.
wrong,
Hmm.
and so I talked to him about my concerns. And unfortunately, he's one of those people that just doesn't enjoy thinking really deeply and philosophically about things. Like that's
Yeah.
just not his thing. And so my concerns weren't his concerns, and they didn't really bother him or make sense to him. And so the answer that I got from him was like, oh, I think he said, you're just majoring in the minors. I was like, not
Yeah.
helpful. So like he was kind about it, but he wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
So I was really honestly completely alone, and I had to figure it out all by myself.
Right. I feel unfortunately that is more true for people that deconstruct than it should be.
Mm,
Um, my journey was somewhat similar. Most of my friends who fell away was somewhat similar as well. And I think your response is pretty characteristic because those people have, it's easier to not discuss those difficult issues and
mhm.
keep moving the train along than it is to actually take them apart. And someone made the point they call them shelf items. I had a conversation with someone recently who left the JW, I believe, either Mormon or JW, and they refer to these as shelf issues, issues that you know are problematic, but you don't have time to worry about. So you're going to put them on the shelf for later and then hopefully get to them.
I can understand that. I can. I think about like people like me, or
Mhm.
people particularly who are, say, pastors, and their entire livelihood is based on believing this.
Mhm.
it costs you so much to
Yeah.
let that belief go.
Yeah.
And I think that's also one of the things that bothers me when, Christians will say, "Oh, you were never that serious about it, or you just wanted to live a life of sin." Like, no, this cost me a ton. Like, it
Yeah.
would be so much easier if I had kept believing.
Right.
And so I don't begrudge anyone for, yeah, putting it on the shelf and not dealing with it,
Mm-hmm.
because it is really painful. It's really lonely. You have a lot to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand avoiding that.
And you get treated differently by some of your friends and family quite often. You know what I mean? They feel awkward around you now. You know,
Yeah.
um, when you kind of got closer through your deconstruction journey, was there a point at which you kind of realized that you didn't believe? Because I feel like it works on a spectrum from like I kind of believe all these things, and well maybe these things, well maybe now these things, but then there kind of comes a moment you're like, I don't know if I believe any of this anymore.
Yeah, for me, it was this really interesting, like questioning, and then in a moment, it all fell apart.
Okay.
Um, so I was really wrestling for months about, you know, hell and the Bible and God.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked into a bookstore like a Barnes and Noble or something, and I was going into the religious section to try and find some other book that would answer my questions. Because that was all of my community was just
Right.
books.
Right.
And there was this little section in the religion section, and I had never even read these kinds of stories before. And it was some book that said, like, from pastor to atheist. And I picked up the book, and all I felt was this huge sense of relief of
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And it was just like letting go of all of my trying and trying and trying. And in that moment, I realized I didn't believe any of it anymore.
Yeah.
And it like, because for me, it just happened all at once. And, it's one of those things where I don't think Christians have to wrestle with this idea very often,
Mm-hmm.
that like you can't choose what you believe in. Like, you can choose your actions, sometimes you can choose your environment, but
Right.
like your actual what you truly believe, you don't get to choose that. And so, once I had this moment where it all fell away, um I didn't want that to happen. Like, I was still sort of fighting for it, of like, no, I'm gonna work through this and make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you can't make yourself believe something that you don't believe.
Right. And I think my one of my favorite descriptions was given by Bart Ehrman because he grew up in the faith and then left, and he's kind of a famous atheist today, but he described it as he was drug away from the faith kicking and screaming.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is a common, it's hard to describe, but it's a common feeling because nobody really, few people want to leave the faith. It's much more convenient to stay in the faith. But at some point in time, as you said, you either believe or you don't. It's a hard thing to control.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's yeah, I did not want to stop believing.
Right.
It was my whole life, it was my whole identity and my community. And so yeah, I definitely did not choose it.
Once at some point it became obvious, I'm sure, to people around you that you were no longer part of the faith, even if you didn't tell them explicitly. Did you have any people that kind of came behind you and tried to convince you that, don't believe your lying eyes, you should still be in the faith? Or
Um, so I had a few people at church. I had gotten really involved in this church, and so they definitely noticed that I stopped teaching Sunday school, and then I stopped
Mhm.
going. And
Right.
so I had that couple that I was talking about earlier, and then I had another friend, a woman who was just a few years older than me, and she wanted to like sit down and talk, and she couldn't answer any of my questions.
Hmm.
And she's like, you're just thinking about it too hard. And I go, well, don't think so.
It has to make sense if it's going to be true, right?
Yeah, like it shouldn't, if something is true, then the deeper you dig into it, the more true it should be,
Yes.
not the less true.
Yes. Because when you dig into it, you find more and more problems, right? You start with 2 questions, you end with 20.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's true a lot of Christianity, that it makes sense if you don't think about it too hard, and
Right.
I think growing up in it, if you just have some of these base assumptions, you just
Mm.
go through life assuming those things are true. And when you
Yep.
take the time to question those, like, oh, wait, that actually doesn't make any sense.
Right. Now you are in a science field, and that puts us in kind of an interesting minority, because I feel like a lot of the people from a science background don't also have a faith background, but both of us did. And for me, having a background in engineering and the sciences was one of the things that led me to start questioning
Mm.
some of what I read in the text, specifically nonsense things like the age of the earth, or the how everyone descended from two people. But the DNA evidence doesn't seem to suggest any of that. Did science play a part in your deconstruction journey?
Not explicitly. It did happen while I was in graduate
Mm-hmm.
school. Certainly, there was a lot more focus on being scientific.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in undergrad, I was one of those people who didn't really have to study that hard to get good grades. And so most of my
I
life,
am envious.
most of my life was social, and all through college it was relationships with God and people and emotions and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to grad school, it was a very rude awakening for me.
Yeah.
And it was a harsh, cold, sterile environment.
Mm.
And so that probably played a role too. But I think for me it was um failings of the relationship that I had with God.
Yeah.
God didn't do what he said he was going to do. And I think that was the biggest piece for me.
Right. Yeah, that is hard too, especially because we're led to believe. You ever see those Bible promise books?
Oh, yeah.
Those are some awfully bad promises you're putting out there, because I don't see a whole lot of follow through.
Yeah, exactly. There's um I I decided not to get into a
Mm-hmm.
TikTok argument with
Mm-hmm.
somebody about this, but Jesus makes some really big promises
Yeah.
about prayer that he does not come through on,
Right.
and it's you are left to, if he
Mm-hmm.
says he's going to answer your prayers and he doesn't, you either have to decide that he lied or he does not exist,
Right.
or you have to blame yourself.
Right.
And so I think that's what I was able to do for a long time, was like, it just must be me. I'm just doing it wrong. I'm not
Yes.
right. I don't have enough faith. I'm not good
Yes.
enough. And it's my fault. And also super damaging.
Yeah.
Um, so I think yeah, the promises are, oh, that's rough stuff.
That is tough. I do I do remember having those discussions with my teacher in high school, because she did make us read some of the New Testament. I went to a Catholic high school, and I remember reading specifically the promise that you could throw a mountain into the water if you have enough faith. And I was like, being that nobody's ever done that yet, I have to assume that either this is a really ridiculous hyperbole, or Jesus didn't really mean what he says. Um, so just a couple more questions to wrap up. I don't want to take your whole morning. Um, Given that we're going to say you're already on the latter stage of your deconstruction journey. Do you feel like you would have, if you have, say, your own family in the future, would you how would you address these topics with your own children, or even your own nieces and nephews, or young people that are in your life? How do you talk about these things? I feel like even if you're not in the faith, when children have questions, a lot of times you get really canned answers that still come from Christianity, because it's like baked into the culture. Like oh no, honey, you're not gonna die one day and then be eaten by worms. You'll go to heaven. I'm not a Christian, but that's what I'm told to believe. Like, so have you considered how you'll address this matter with your future family?
Yeah, I have. So I have a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and she is definitely asked me these kinds of questions. And part of it was, why don't we go to church? I got
Right.
that. So I told her some of my story, and basically said that, um, well, we don't go to church because there are some big things that I disagree with, that the church teaches. And I explained things
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
um, not being okay with gay marriage, and,
Right.
thinking that people go to hell. And I was like, I don't think that that's true. And so I don't want you to have to think that. And that made sense to her.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, oh, yeah, that seems like a dumb belief.
Right. Right.
um, we I think she is a naturally kind of empathetic, sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a sense of morals that come from empathy make a lot of sense to her intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about right and wrong, we can talk about how our actions affect other people. And so she hasn't really needed like a God to
Mm-hmm.
have morals that way. And she hasn't asked me a lot about death. Um, but I think also, like, I'll tell her the truth in that, like, I don't know,
There's a time and a place for that.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the truth is I really don't know. I really don't know what's gonna happen to us when we die. And
Well, we
so
haven't died yet, so how could we?
exactly. So I do
Yeah.
just try and be as truthful as I can with what's appropriate for her age.
Right. And then maybe two more questions. One question is, are there people in your life that you purposely don't choose to have this discussion with? For example, I have an aunt who just turned 80, and I don't know how much time she has left, but her relationship with God is the most important thing in her life, and she would be incredibly traumatized if she learned that I'm no longer in the faith. So I make sure she doesn't find out. But
Ah,
not
yeah.
not for me, but for her, because I don't want her to, whether it's 5, 10, or even 15 years from now, go to her deathbed worried about my salvation.
Yeah, well, and that's kind, I think. So my parents know. I told them because talking about God was such a big part of our relationship, and so I couldn't lie about it. So they had to
Right.
know. Um, the people that I don't have the conversation
Mhm.
with, are often more my students. So
Right.
I teach at a Catholic university, but it's
Mhm.
sort of a Catholic light. Like, religion is not a
Mhm.
big part of my
Right.
job. But I mentor some students, and we get to be close. And some of those students are Christians, and it's really important to them. And so I just don't bring it up, or like when they say
Mhm.
what God is doing in their lives, I say, that's awesome. Like, great. Sounds good. Because I really don't want to change anyone's beliefs. And I don't
Right.
want to be the person who takes that away from them if it's giving them comfort and
Right.
stability.
Right. I agree with that. If they start their own deconstruction journey, they need to do it on their own terms, not because someone told them to.
Yeah, for sure. Because yeah, we know how much it costs you.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm not in a hurry to start that off for anybody.
And then we'll end on this question. do you have any advice for someone who is in the middle of their deconstruction journey that you can give them that maybe you found helpful that maybe they should know as well?
I think things are definitely easier now.
Yeah,
I deconstructed in 2009, 2010. So using things like social media is awesome. What a great resource, because I know when you're deconstructing, you might not want to talk to people directly in your life, because there's
right,
consequences for that. So using social media to reach out and connect with people is awesome. The other advice I would have is just be kind to yourself.
right.
It is a painful process, and just remind yourself that humans get to make mistakes,
Yeah,
and making mistakes does not make you a bad person, and you are doing the best that you can.
that's really good advice. You have much better, more empathetic advice than I would give. Mine is robotic and straight to the facts. Uh, well, I really appreciate your time, and it's been most helpful. We'll look forward to seeing more of your TikToks as they keep rolling out. And again, for anyone watching this, please go to TikTok now if you have a TikTok account and sign up to follow Sarah's TikToks. If you don't have a TikTok, now's a good time to sign up. And hopefully we'll see you there. Yeah,
Thank,
thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate you. Have a great Sunday.
thank you. You too.